Good morning. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we meet and we learn from each other today on country. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people. This comparatively young library, the State Library of New South Wales, sits on one of the world's great ancient libraries, a rich repository of oral tradition, and I pay my sincere respect to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are here with us this morning. Welcome. My name is Rachel Franks and I'm the Coordinator of Scholarship here at the library. And normally when we have our Scholar Talk series, we're presenting the work of our fellows. But every now and then throughout the year, we also have other scholars presenting their research, having experimented and delved into our wonderful collections. Now, we've had a few food studies projects over the years, but we haven't had something this specific before, I think. Today, it's all about flour bag labels between the wars. To present this really fascinating insight into our food studies collection is Professor Paul Ashton. He will be known to many of you through his work of many years as a public historian based here in Sydney and covering a really wide variety of topics. And most recently, he has started a series of histories for children, Accidental Histories. The first volume came out late. Now, if you have any questions for Paul today, please use the Q&A or the chat feature in Zoom, and I'll be back in a little while to ask your questions. Thanks so much, Paul.
Hello, and I've got to get my screen up. Hello.
We can hear, just can't see you yet, Paul.
Okay, I've turned my video on, but I can't seem to, I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
Sure can.
Okay. Pardon me, I'm having a bit of a technical problem here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'll see if I can get myself back on, but I think it'd be better for us to look at the PowerPoint rather than at me. So I won't risk a technical collapse at this early point in the talk. The flour bag labels, which we're going to look at today, I tripped over literally in the State Library. I was doing some research around flour milling, and I was writing a photographic history of flour milling in Australia, and I just happened to stumble upon these. So it's in many ways an accidental collection and an accidental history. And Wendy Holtz at the State Library also told me that the labels actually came serendipitously to the library from the Women's Library, which at that point was at Alexandra in the mid-1990s. And someone from the old Mungo Scott flour mill at Summerhill approached the library's then ephemeron librarian, Colin Warner, to see if they'd be interested in keeping them. And he definitely was. And now here we are talking about these fantastic labels. Okay, so I'll start now. The digitised collection was made possible through a grant from the Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation. Jess Jennings and I produced a book published by Halstead Press last year titled Branded: Australian Flour Bag Labels Between the Wars, which includes about 103 of these fascinating labels. There's about 300 altogether in the collection. Most, if not all of them, were probably designed between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II. It's also likely that they are proofs made for checking before the final artwork was screen printed onto bags made out of tightly woven cotton. There were a few hundred milling companies in Australia when these labels were designed. though their numbers diminished as the recession set in during the 1920s, which led to the 1930s depression and saw mill numbers drop to around 130. Probably in the 1880s, the number of mills in Australia was probably around 1,500. And again, by the 1930s, it had dropped to 130. And today there's probably about 30 major milling companies, not taking into account boutique milling outfits. So you'll see a few of the names of the largest of them on some of the 11 labels I'll show today, including E.G. Barker, Gillespie Brothers, J.A. Hemphill and Sons, but most are simply identified as Sydney roller flour, Australian roller flour, or simply Australian. So this is all about branding. There's not a lot to differentiate white roller flour. It's white and flourish. So then, as now, brands were valuable assets and they were fiercely guarded. During 1932, Edwin Davey and Sons took legal action against James Minfie and Company in the Supreme Court of Victoria. Davey and Sons alleged that Minfie and Co had, and this is a quote from the court proceedings, in pursuance of a contract with a purchaser in Singapore, shipped flour from Melbourne in bags marked in a manner specified by the purchaser. The bags were filled and loaded into trucks at the appellant's mill during the night and covered undercover to the wharf from which they were shipped. The respondent, Davey and Sons, was the proprietor in Australia of a trademark registered in respect of flour, and the mark used by the appellant so closely resembled that of the respondents as to be calculated to deceive. The court found Minfie and Co guilty, so the company lodged an appeal in the High Court of Australia. The case was heard in 1933. Davey and Sons' lawyer told the High Court, and I quote again from the court proceedings, prior to the year 1925, the defendant had not used the trademark, complained of in this action in any way. One F.J. Hallard of Singapore was in Melbourne at the beginning of January 1925 and had several interviews with the defendant in reference to a proposal that he should be appointed the defendant's agent in Singapore and elsewhere. Hello, I might be up there. On the 19th of January 1925, a letter of which the following is a copy was sent by the defendant to Hallard. And here it is, January 19, 1925, Mr. F.J. Hallard, Singapore, dear sir. As a result of our recent interviews, we confirm, having appointed you our agent in Singapore, Malaya Peninsula, Siam, Ceylon, and the Dutch East Indies, with the exception of existing regular customers on the following terms. You will not sell any flour except through us. Commission, we will allow you 0.75% on the CIF, which is cost, insurance and freight, and a bill of lading, invoice and insurance policy price on all flour sold by your efforts. Such commission to be payable at your request after completion of each transaction. Cable expenses, we will pay all cable expenses incurred by you on our behalf. Travelling expenses, we will allow you £50 per annum, payable £25 in advance every 6 months. This agreement can be terminated by either party by 1 month's notice in writing. Around September 1925, Mr. Hallard started doing business with A. Cluett and Company in Singapore. Davey and Sons' lawyer read a cabled message that Hallard had sent to his employer, to Justices George Rich, Hayden Stark, Owen Dixon and H.V. Evatt. And here it was. Adelphi Hotel, Singapore, 27 July 1925, Mrs. Jazz, Minfie and Co, Melbourne. Dear Sirs, Re A. Cluett and Company, it is possible in the near future this firm will order flour, but it may have to be packed in either 150 or 280 pound bags. Still, on the other hand, they may occasionally want 49-pound bags, and if so, I give you below a rough sketch of brand they will require and leave it to yourselves to put in proper order. F.J. Hallard. Later that year, Hallard sent the following correspondence to Menifee and Co. via telegram. Order, September 18, 1925, from A. Cluett and Co., 7 Raffles Quay, Singapore, to Menifee and Co., 410 Collins Street, Melbourne, 25 tonnes first grade flour at £16, some shillings, cost insurance and freight, and billing ladle per tonne, £2,000 packed in 49-pound bags. Brand Rooster, as per sketch, sent 27 July 1925. Shipment came through the city of Palermo, shipped early October, documents at site through Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, signed F.J. Hallard. So Menifee and Co.'s appeal was dismissed, leaving behind a trail of detail about the workings, legal and otherwise, of the international flour milling business, which was huge. But it also points to shifts in the international market for wheat and flour. Just going to try to move the slide on now. There we are. The Southeast Asian flour market. Wool, wheat, and to a lesser but still significant extent flour were big ticket items in Australia's export economy. But during the 1920s, a crisis began to emerge in the global wheat industry. Recession from the mid-1920s and a global bumper wheat crop in 1928 changed the world market. Reacting to the harsh impacts of World War I, some European countries also developed agrarian policies to support and boost peasant holdings. Frank McDougall, British-born Australian farmer and economic advisor to the Australian government, who helped establish the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organisation, wrote in 1935 that, and I quote, "No one can begin to grasp the world wheat situation unless he clearly recognises that European countries will do everything to maintain the peasant, and what wheat, together with other cereals in Eastern Europe and sugar beet, are the mainstay of the peasant and traditional society." At this time, the Australian government was trying to grapple with the great mess it had created on the land by establishing small-scale soldier settlement yeoman peasant farms. McDougall continued, "The continental European attitude towards the overseas wheat-growing countries, that is Australia, is that they are upstarts whose farmers, aided by the biologist and the agricultural engineer, threaten the foundation of old world society." French tariffs, for example, on imported wheat and flour from the mid-1920s had a major impact on Australia's exports to France. Total French imports from Australia had reached £19.9 million by 1925, which is a huge amount of money, but had fallen to £4.6 million in 1932, around the height of the Great Depression. Australia turned to Asian markets. By this time, exports to Japan had reached £11.7 million from £3.8 million in 1919, and export to other Asian countries rose to £9 million. This amounted to more than 20% of all Australian exports. In terms of flour, in the period 1933 to 1934, a total of 26,000 bushels of flour were exported from Australia. Asian countries purchased 55% of that flour. So we go from Asian countries around the beginning of Federation purchasing 2 or 3% of our flour to the mid-1930s, they're purchasing more than half. Paradoxically, the desire for markets and money outweighed the fear and hatred of Asian countries that had been branded as the Yellow Peril, an East and Southeastern Asian menace to the Western world. Markets also materialised in Asian parts of Western empires. in British India, French Indochina, including Cambodia, Laos, parts of China, Vietnam provinces of Tonkin, Amman and Cochin China, as well as the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, and the Philippines, which became a territory of the United States from 1898 until 1946. After the global 1890s depression, a period of modernisation commenced. Old cities were overhauled. New Delhi was built between 1912 and 1929. Cities such as Sydney had their infrastructure renewed to keep pace with developments in technology such as steamships, motor vehicles and telephones. Mass production brought about by the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century accelerated, particularly after World War I. Modernisation also swelled the ranks of the middle classes in the West and stimulated their growth in the East. This fueled demands for greater quantities and qualities of flour. The flour bag labels in the State Library's collection reflect these and other developments and contexts. They are laden with meaning. The commercial artists who designed these brand labels drew on a whole range of both complementary and contradictory things to create them. They drew on their own sense of Asian aesthetics, mythology, magic, nature, history, and gender, modernity and tradition, continuity and change. Themes include mythical creatures such as dragons, magic and luck, seen in one label as dice, and on another as an all-seeing eye. Mills, exotic buildings and landscapes, modernity, including cranes and fast ships, fruit for health and beauty, plants and flowers, people, including famous contesses, naval commanders, birds like fighting cocks, other animals like lions, calligraphy, typography, and boats and other objects. These flour bag labels are both artworks and artefacts. They were created for specific purposes. We need to read the intentions and meanings in their design. Okay. Of the 11 flour bags labels I've chosen for this talk, I'd like to start with one which is my absolute favourite. Just before I do, I'll mention here, this is a picture in 1933 of a Chinese merchant, flour merchant in Singapore, dealing with an Australian flour merchant. And again, this one I just tripped over accidentally, found it in the State Library's excellent collection. Here he's having a cup of tea in a cafe, and here he is hoxing in Singapore in 1933 with a framed version of his flour bag label presented to him by his agent. Okay. So this label, again, which is my favourite, features a dragon. And I've chosen it to show the ways in which these pieces of material culture can be read. This label almost certainly appeared on perhaps thousands of bags containing 22.36 kilograms or not 49 pounds of Australian flour, presumably milled in Sydney. We don't know where this one was milled in particular. The flour would have been shipped to a merchant in Medan named Guan Thai. Medan was in the Dutch East Indies, which is now called Indonesia. It is the capital of North Sumatra and the province's largest city. It was and is today a major financial centre. The main ethnic groups living in the region were and remain Batak, Javanese, Malay, Chinese. What then are the creatures in the centre of the label? And what are they doing? The red creature, I feel confident to say, is a prawn, and it seems to be playing, but what or who plays with prawns? If we look into Chinese mythology, we discover that prawn soldiers were under the command of dragon kings. So too were crab generals, carpfish, and tortoises. Dragon kings were also believed to play with phoenixes and with pearls, So the ball is a giant pearl. There were dragon kings for each season. The one on this flower bag label could be the azure dragon, the blue-green dragon of the east, which is the essence of spring, appropriate for harvests. Benign Chinese dragons also had supernatural powers, which allowed them to control fire, ice, wind, and water. And this dragon is breathing fire. There is also a very popular tale in Chinese folklore about the dragon pearl. The story goes something like this. Pardon me, I'll just have a quick drink of water. The dragon pearl. The rural province of Shenshan was under the fist of a wicked and greedy emperor who starved the people and desolated the land. Lai Lang and his mother were peasants living in the province. Lai went out one day in search of grass to sell for fodder at the market, but grass was scarce and his mother became ill. One day, while searching for grass, he came to a mountain. He climbed it. The mountain and surrounding area were bare, but on the way down he saw a rabbit, which he chased. It got away, but in chasing it, he stumbled over a hidden patch of succulent grass. Each day, Lai returned to the patch of grass, and each day it had miraculously grown back. So he decided to dig up some of the grass and plant it at home. Under the grass, he found a huge pearl. Lai rushed home with the grass and the pearl. He wanted to sell it, but his mother said it was special and that they should keep it. They put it in their rice sack for safekeeping. The next morning, the grass was dead, but the rice bag was overflowing with rice. It kept growing and growing. Lai and his mother shared the rice with many neighbours. No one knew about the pearl, but word got around about the miraculous rice sack. Eventually, robbers came to steal the sack. Lai hid the pearl in his mouth. He must have had a pretty big mouth, but he accidentally swallowed it. He started to feel burning sensations in his body and a great thirst. He escaped from the robbers and rushed to a nearby river, drinking all the little stream of water that trickled through it. Then it happened. Storm clouds gathered, lightning struck the ground, and endless rain poured down. The river filled with water, and the land was covered with grasses and plants. Lai turned into a giant dragon and flew into the heavens. So who designed the labels? Did the Chinese merchant Guan Thai provide the artwork for this label, or at least the idea for it to make the product more attractive to Chinese customers living in Medan? Was this done through the Sydney miller's agent in the Dutch East Indies, or did a commercial artist in Sydney produce the label? We don't know, but it's a great story that also tells us about the need to protect the earth and the vital importance of grain. Pardon me. I'll just go through some of the themes now. Luck and magic. Luck and magic play important roles in Asian culture. And this is a lovely, simple flower bag label. Sometimes designers drew on symbols of them to attract customers. And here again, we have dice. 8 is the luckiest number. It means success and wealth. And did you know the opening ceremony of the Beijing Summer Olympics was held at 8 a.m. on the 8th of August in 2008? The person who designed this label didn't use the number 8, but they used other numbers on the dice. In Chinese culture, 6 means smooth luck or good fortune. It's often thought to be good for business. 5 is associated with the elements which are said to make up the ancient Chinese world: earth, fire, metal, water, and wood. And it was connected to the emperor. 4 is the most unlucky of numbers. When pronounced, it sounds like the word for death. That's probably why it's coloured red on the label. No death here, just good fortune and business. Landscapes. Landscapes are often represented on these flower bag labels. Some of them have natural features. Others have buildings such as mills and palaces. This one features a waterfall. Okay, Feng Shui. Feng Shui, Fen means wind, Shui means water. It's a system of rules about where things should be placed and where they should face. And it's about 3,000 years old. It can focus positive energies, stop evil spirits coming into your home, and bring you luck. And luck is a very important thing. And the luckiest thing in a landscape, according to Chinese folklore and mythology, is a waterfall. Waterfalls are extremely lucky. They attract huge flows of good fortune, prosperity, and wealth into your life. Having pictures of waterfalls in your house attracts all of these things into your life. And apparently having a picture of a waterfall in your purse or wallet draws money into them. And that's why there's a waterfall on this particular flower bag label. Now, this label is about modernity. In many ways, Asian cultures can be very traditional. Many things are done in the same way that their ancestors had done for centuries. During the 20th century, they began to modernise, and some of their habits and ideas changed, and some economic activities started to industrialise. This label for Crane brand roller flower reflects the rise of modernisation and people's growing acceptance of it. But there are other developments which influenced flower importation. From the early 1900s, large numbers of Japanese businessmen moved to Davao in the Philippines, where this flower was sent. They set up huge coconut and banana plantations. Several popular Japanese dishes are made with wheat flour, including ramen, tempura, and other things. It's also used to make big flaky breadcrumbs known as panko for coating breaded foods such as croquettes, ebi fry, and other things. So migration and immigration are working here. Fruit. This flower label was bound for Hong Kong, as you can see. We don't know the identity of the Australian manufacturer or the Asian merchant, but like most of the other bags, its design is tied up with Chinese superstitions. Certain fruits are auspicious. The largest piece of fruit in the label centre is a pomelo. It symbolises family unity and a lucky home. The tangerines on the right promise wealth and good luck. Like oranges, tangerines are exchanged as gifts, particularly in the new year. And they are displayed in the home. The tangerines also indicate the Feng Shui principle that all good things come in twos. The only fruit you won't find on an Asian flower bag label is a pear. It's pronounced like the word for parting or leaving. Plants and flowers. There's nothing particular about luck in this label. Theo H. Davis & Co. Limited was an old shipping and trading firm. It started in England and became based in Hawaii. It was heavily involved in sugarcane plantations, and in 1928, the company opened a branch in Manila in the Philippines. There it expanded its sugarcane operations. So why choose an orchid as a brand? Well, orchids are a perennial herb from the Orchidaceae family, but that's not why it was chosen. Orchids are adored in the Philippines, which has one of the richest range of them in the world. There are around 1,000 types of orchids in the country. The Vanda sardinaria orchid is considered to be the queen of Philippine flowers. It's commonly called the wailing or Sandavanda, after the famous orchidologist Henry Frederick Conrad Sander. It's worshipped by the indigenous Bagabo people who have lived on the island of Mindanao, and it could be the orchid on this flower bag label. People, another theme running through these flower bag labels. The person on this flower bag label is a sportsman. His hand is in a curved wicker cesta or basket. It's used to throw a ball off walls at high speed. It's a bit like squash. Lots of people played it in Spain, France, and South America. This game was first played in the 1500s. It was called Jai Alai in 1875 by a Basque mining engineer and writer who was born and lived in Spain, and his name was Serafin Baroja. He quit mining in the early 1870s to write novels and operas after the company he worked for was purchased by foreign investors. It later became Rio Tinto. From the second half of the 16th century to the turn of the 20th century, the Philippines was a Spanish colony. Jai Alai became a very popular sport in the Philippines, which is why the distributor chose to represent the sport on the label. Lotendina started as a small distillery in 1902. That's their name down the bottom of the label. By the mid-1920s, it was the largest company of its kind in the country, and it used its networks to distribute Australian flour. Okay, birds and butterflies. Birds and butterflies is another key theme in these flour bags. This butterfly flour bag label is a bit mysterious, but let's try and break it down. Most people with the family name Langsa live in Indonesia. So the merchant buying the Gillespie brothers flour from Sydney may have been in that country. Why a butterfly? Well, butterfly motifs are common in the Han Chinese culture. They pop up in their art, crafts, clothing, accessories, like early 20th century handbags, and in architecture. Over centuries, the Han Chinese immigrated in huge numbers to Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia. So the Chinese characters for butterfly, when pronounced, mean the same as good fortune and the elders. So butterflies are associated with prosperity and long life. Okay, other animals, and clearly Australian. Animals often featured on flour bags. Domestic beasts used in day-to-day activities like farming and grazing, such as buffaloes, elephants and goats, were used on labels. Powerful creatures such as lions and racing horses appeared in some designs. Exotic animals, including giraffes and the odd Australian animal, like the wombat on this label, graced some artwork. And there were also special creatures. Bats are a good example. Asian cultures have far more positive perceptions of bats than those in the West. Vampires aren't a big deal in the Philippines. There they are said to be able to give warnings of natural disasters such as earthquakes. They appear as motifs in textiles and art and are used for food and medicine. And also in Chinese culture, they symbolize good luck and blessings. Okay. I found digital copies of these flour bag labels in 2020, but I had a major problem. I can't read Chinese calligraphy. Now, Halstead Press in Sydney published this book branded that the flour bag labels have been produced in, which was commissioned by the Australian Milling Museum in Bathurst. And it's got a website where you can look at the two books that we produced there. It turned out, however, that Halstead's publisher, Matthew Richardson, could read these. I was in his office one day and said, "Oh, God, Matthew, how am I going to work out what this says?" And he just said, "Leave me a dozen and I'll have a look at them." So he translated some of the calligraphy for the Milling Museum, which was extremely kind of him. This label was produced for the Penang merchant Chiat Mo. The Chinese writing on the right reads, import business New Gold Mountain, a New Gold Mountain referring to Australia, and fine white. On the left, it reads top superior horse vehicle, best flour. The picture of the carriage also tells us about the influence of the Western world on the East. Respectable women dressed in European clothes are being driven by coachmen wearing top hats. The carriage brand. boats and objects. This flower bag label was produced for Pottinger and Company in Tientsin. The city was and remains a major Chinese metropolitan area on the innermost bay of the Yellow Sea. Tientsin was captured by British and French gunboats in 1858 during the Second Opium War. From that time on, it was governed by alliances of imperial powers, including Britain, Russia, France, Germany, Japan, Austria, America, and Italy, until it returned to the Qin dynasty control in 1902. From then, Tientsin was modernised. It became a leading centre of commerce, finance and industry, and it fell to the Japanese in 1937. British forces were allowed to remain until 1940. The American Marine detachment at Tientsin was forced to surrender to Japanese the day after Pearl Harbor was bombed on the 7th of December 1941. The Chinese writing on the right reads AU Continent High-Grade Flour. On the left, it reads Tientsin General Abundance Overseas Company. So now you know as much about these Australian flour bags produced for Asian markets between the wars as I do, and I'll leave it there for some questions.
Thanks so much, Paul, and thank you. I think I can safely say that no one has ever declared in Scholar Talk that vampires aren't a big deal. So thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions coming through. So someone's asking, and quite sensibly, I think, so you've spoken about how you came across this collection and it was quite a serendipitous find, but what really drew you into these labels? Because it's one thing to sort of discover something in a collection and say, oh, that's interesting, and it's quite another to at least see the potential of those materials and turn it, as you have, into at least part of a book.
Yeah, I was actually looking for some flower bag. I was searching for flower bag labels. I'd found a couple in other places, and we had one donated to the Australian Milling Museum from Bathurst, where it's located. But when I came upon these, they were so beautiful. The designs were so diverse, ranging from very simple ones like the one on the screen here to the dragon with the pearl. I just immediately thought these can't just sit in a digital repository in an archive. They need to be out there and published. And so we actually ran, the shopfront at UTS has an annual final year program for visual communication students, and they're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant students. And we put this project up along with the photographic history, and the students produced these two magnificent books, one based on the flower bag labels. And what we've done with that book is that there's an extended introduction. There are no chapters really. The book's broken up into 11 parts. But in the middle of the book, there is a collection of old photographs showing the places that these flower bags went between the 1920s and World War II. But no, they were just marvellous. And again, I just felt a need to actually get them out in the open.
Someone's asking a more logistical question about these labels. They're very interested in the odd weights. So 47 pounds or 20.23 kilos. Is that standard across the labels that you've looked at?
Yes, I'm not sure why they chose that particular weight. It may have related to what they considered to be the maximum weight that a person could carry. And flour and wheat bags, I've carted a couple around just as a test, and they're incredibly heavy. I remember talking years ago to a wheat lumper whose spine had basically fused because he'd spent so many years carrying these incredibly heavy bags around. But I suspect that the weight relates to transport and movement.
Someone's asking about the repurposing of these labels. They're asking, do we know if there is any visual evidence of people having used them for clothing or other things? And can you direct us towards your resources and the resources that you've been speaking about today? I mean, obviously, some of the library, but if we can talk about clothing first.
Sure. That in the photographic history, which is called, and I hate to say it, The Power of Flour, a photographic history of milling in Australia. And I was going to call it Flour Power, but my partner said that's stupid, call it something else. So The Power of Flour, and a local person who's a friend of the Milling Museum gave us a photograph of their daughter when she was about 5 in a beautiful little dress made out of a Tremain's Mill flour bag, and they'd sewn it. It was really cute. So during the Depression, and not just the Depression, but amongst poor people in the 19th century and well into the 20th century, people reused flour bags to actually make clothing, and often undergarments and things like that. Sometimes they would bleach them to get rid of the label. Other times they would leave the label on if it was appropriate. So they've been used in many, many different ways, again, mainly by poor people for clothes. More recently, with retro stuff, you see these posters appearing in poster form, people hanging them on their wall. We at the flour mill, I'm just pushing the milling museum a little bit here. We've actually got some merchandise with tote bags, and we've got an apron with the wombat label on it, which is very cute. So a local place in Bathurst actually produces them on demand for us. So I don't know a lot more about their use than what I've just said, but I'm sure there's a project in that.
Someone's just commenting that they were definitely used for clothing in both Australia and the United States, where they were specifically marketed as children options. So I guess that makes sense if you're talking about people with not a lot of resources, but flour is quite a staple product. They have this bag. Little Pikelet's going to outgrow it soon anyway, so why not reuse this cotton that they have?
Absolutely.
Someone is asking about the labels and how they changed over time depending on how countries were being occupied. And they've highlighted one of the labels that you've used in your presentation. So a Philippine label, which has the layering of Japanese graphics, and behind that depiction of a Spanish sport. So do you have anything else that you might want to say about that? And there it is. Yeah.
Yes, I think they're, pardon me, they're incredibly eclectic. They're drawing on anything that will make that product appealing to people in very specific places with very specific cultural backgrounds. And I think that can be seen right through all of these examples, and in the ones in the book. But they are very eclectic.
And are there some of the actual bags themselves that survive? Do you have any at the museum?
We've got a couple of examples at the museum. We're actually basically transitioning to a virtual museum for a whole range of reasons. COVID hit us pretty hard, but I haven't seen many of the flour bag labels that are in the book or in this presentation around, and as far as I know, most of them exist digitally in the State Library's collection, and in the originals that are in there as well. Again, it was digitised by the State Library.
Someone's off a little bit of family law for us this morning. So they come from a Canadian background, and they can remember their grandmothers embroidering the edges of flour sacks, and that some of the smaller sacks were used as pillowcases.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I could imagine that. I haven't heard about that, but I could imagine they would have been put to numerous purposes. Yeah.
And someone's also suggesting that the ice would be very important for Malaysian masks, and it would have been quite attractive to local buyers over there.
Mm-hmm.
And people are just generally surprised at how colourful and how expensive potentially the production of some of these labels would have been to produce, even if they're being mass produced, if you compare them to, the rather bland flour labels that we see in supermarkets today. Do you have any idea of the cost, or perhaps the lead time, or the overall investment into producing a design?
Not specifically, but I would say that when the period we're looking at here, you've got many competing companies in the 30s, say around 132 major flour mills. And again, flour is flour. There's different sorts of flours, for biscuits or for baking cakes or for bread. Very specific types of flour, but across the board, there is no significant differentiation between different sorts of flour. They're all flour for whatever purpose. So it was imperative for producers of flour at this earlier period to spend money on packaging, on labelling, because they had to make their brand stand out. Now you've got probably about 30 or 32 major mills, like there's one at Enfield operating that produces about 700 tonnes of flour a day. I had a tour through there last year.
Wow.
It was like being in the TARDIS. It was just weird, these incredible, huge, literally a 6-story building, which is a flour mill, and the flour moves up and down from one floor to another through various different processes. So today, there is not as strong a need to differentiate a brand because there's not that many of them, and a lot of them specialise in different sorts of flour production. So again, we're looking at just a different economic climate, a different structure in the market, which is now big corporate stuff.
One of my is commenting on the small penciled numbers that appear on at the base of each image on the right-hand side. Now, she's suggesting that perhaps that might have been done by the screen printing firm and not library marks that would have been added once they came into the collection.
Look, absolutely. I have no idea where they came from. It could have been the screen printing firm, might have been just a lot number or an order number. I really have no idea, and I'm sure the library wouldn't have vandalised the front of a beautiful label like this. So, yeah. But
we've written call number on things in the past, and we had a library stamp that went quite rogue in the early days of collecting, but you would have seen some of those.
I've seen a lot of those in very inappropriate and unfortunate places. Yes, but you all sort of like watermarking now with the big commercial companies, I think.
Interesting when you started out your talk this morning that you did flag a couple of my colleagues here at the library, Wendy and Colin particularly. It was really interesting that something that we might take for granted, it's just commercial packaging, blah, blah, blah. But all the people that are behind bringing these really rich, fascinating collections into the library. It's not like things are just neatly bundled and delivered to us. Sometimes, yes, they are, but often there's a lot of people behind these collections and making sure that we have them and then making sure that they are accessible.
Look, absolutely. And I know Wendy, when she found out about this talk, emailed me and told me the background, and that was fascinating. And she said she's going to put that into the catalogue entry, which I think is really important.
Great.
Yeah, because it says a lot about the culture of institutions like the State Library, where the staff are genuinely, absolutely passionate about collecting and about ensuring that material culture from the past survives. And that was a great story, and that's why I just wanted to include it quickly.
Yeah. And you've inspired one of our listeners today. They are very keen wholesale fruit and vegetable boxes and how they may have changed over recent decades, even just something as everyday as bananas that we see stacked up at our local fruit and veg store, those designs and what people are doing on that front. So you've inspired a lot of people today and drawn our attention to something that really does have quite a magical history about all those cultures colliding on something that people would have seen and handled almost every day. It's such an essential base for us to have flour in the home. So thank you very much for that. For those of you who may have been looking forward to the August Scholar Talk, unfortunately, Johanna Ellersdorfer, who is our Rossdale AM Fellow, will be travelling and presenting her research overseas at that time. So that talk will come to us later, possibly early 2024, but I'll be sure to keep you posted on when that talk will be available. So you'll all have to wait until the 5th of September. So our next Scholar Talk will be the first Tuesday of September, and we will have with us Sarah Kirby, one of our Keesing Fellows, and she will be presenting her totally fascinating research about the British Music Society in Sydney in the interwar years. So please join us then for a story of creativity and networking and entertainment. I hope to see you online in September or on site at the library before then. Stay safe, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again, Paul.